Many of you may remember the movie The Perfect Storm, a biographical disaster drama film starring George Clooney. However, the real 1991 Perfect Storm was the storm of the century, boasting waves over 100 feet high, a tempest created by a rare combination of factors that meteorologists deemed it the perfect storm. 13 lives were lost. In a few days, we will once again remember the Emanuel 9 tragedy. It was a traumatic time that even today triggered intrusive thoughts and memories. Do you remember where you were, how you found out, how you felt at the time? It was a time that Sister Goff and I will never forget. After leaving a quarterly conference with Reverend Pinckney and members of the church less than 90 minutes earlier, receiving the call from the Reverend Randolph Miller of a shooting near Mother Emanuel, then he called minutes later informing us that it was inside of Mother Emanuel AME Church. We immediately rushed back to the church only to be met by Mayor Joseph Rowley and the Chief of Police, Greg Mullins. Standing in the command center as the events of the evening unfold, being driven to the embassy suite where the pastors from the Edisto district, along with others, stood, prayed for the victims and their families and our church members. Standing in the ballroom all night, counseling and praying as the coroner called family members into a private room to report the devastating loss of their loved ones. For those of us who were there, who visited the homes of the victims, meeting with families, who helped plan and attend the funerals, who attended the first worship service after the massacre, who witnessed the vicious attacks on our church by some victims, some of their family members, people outside of our church, including the eager reporter from the Post and Courier. The thoughts come flooding back 5 years later. Truth crushed to the earth shall rise again. The members of Mother Emanuel is to be commended for their steadfast commitment to God and to our church, which brings us to the 2020 Perfect Storm. Most notably, Walter Scott, the Emanuel 9, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Tamara Rice, Sandra Bland, Freddie Gray, Breonna Taylor, Philando Castile, George Floyd, Rashad Brooks, COVID-19, Black Lives Matter, no justice, no peace. Years of bigotry, racism, and disparate treatment across the spectrum of American life seemingly has come to a head. Minneapolis, May 25th, 2020. George Floyd was handcuffed and lying down on a city street during an arrest. Derek Chauvin, a white American Minneapolis police officer, kept his knee on the right side of Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. According to the criminal complaint against Chauvin, 2 minutes and 53 seconds of that time occurred after Floyd became unresponsive. Minneapolis, Columbia, Charleston, Phoenix, Mississippi, Chicago, New York, Columbus, Oakland, Louisville, Denver, Detroit, and cities across America, internationally, in London, Berlin, and New Zealand. On the placards, handwritten posters through the megaphones and masks, their message is universal. Black Lives Matter. For believers, we must remember that our hope is not in how much wealth we accumulate, what tragedies have occurred or will occur in our lives, when we will be treated fairly or equally as humans, or even in our physical health. Neither the stock markets of political power, pandemics, nor the current health or social status provides the source of our identity. For we are all created by God. Psalm 20:7 reminds us, Some trust in chariots, some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. This thought is critical to hold to when fear threatens to grab hold of our hearts. Our God is not surprised by a viral outbreak. He's not disinterested in our fears and concern. He is our rock, our light, and our salvation. This is a good time to hold on to our faith, seek, strengthen, and trust in God for hope and support. Jesus told us, let our light shine in a dark world, and our response in this perfect storm is to shine. As Christians, we are commanded by the word of God to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. More importantly, within our Christian theology, our belief in God must ultimately be tied to our belief in equality. Thus, we must be a united faith community that affirms and expresses the equal worth of all human beings. The faith community must be the institution that forges the equality agenda with the larger community, including political, social, and corporate entities. America is at a critical crossroad. While some argue that religion should only focus on spiritual matters, it is my belief that the time has come for the church to expand its role in public life, but becoming a positive force for transformative social change. Religion reminds us that we are responsible for our decisions and actions. Therefore, it can be informed and reformed our vision of social justice. The church must be the framework for moral decision making, help to build communities by teaching unconditional love and compassion, and provide the moral structure, accountability, and influence for individual human behavior. Remember, we are stronger together. Faith can overcome our fears, and love always overtake hate. God bless the Emanuel 9. God bless the families of those who lost their loved ones to police brutality. God bless Mother Emanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church. Black Lives Matter.
I'll never forget the call, a few minutes after 9, to the shooting in Mother Emanuel. I rushed there, not knowing exactly what had happened, found out that 9 prayerful people had been killed. And I worried about Senator Pinckney because he was in the Senate and they were meeting at that time. And I was concerned about him driving back to Charleston at 90 miles an hour. And I asked one of the police officers if Senator Pinckney arrived yet. And he said, no, Mayor. Senator Pinckney was at the Bible study. And then as it unfolded, I realized not only that I know and love Senator Pinckney, but many of the 9. It just further broke my heart. And then one of the things happened during this time of great heartache. The next morning at Mother Emanuel, there were black people and white people with flowers who just wanted to be with someone, singing and crying and wiping away each other's tears. Friday night, less than 2 days later, the wonderful packed arena, the vigil, and people of all races doing the same thing, holding hands and weeping and singing and praying. And then, proudly, this community is not forgotten. Wonderful initiatives like the Charleston Forum that allowed us to thoughtfully come together about the Emanuel 9, but about the issues of race and injustice in our community. The development of plans for the beautiful memorial that will give everyone a chance to come and pay their respects and be reminded of the evil of bigotry, the fact that this man came from 90 miles away with hatred in his heart. It is unimaginable that anyone could feel that and go into this place of God and kill people in prayer. The memorial will remind us of that and of our duty and responsibility to positively respond. In our community, the forum, wonderful interfaith initiatives are developed, and in so many other ways to make our citizens, was the case with the Hands Across Charleston, people from all backgrounds and colors that know each other were holding their hands and singing and weeping. And so in this period of time, these 5 years, wonderful positive initiatives have developed. And of course, the International African American Museum, now less than 2 years away, will give all of us in this community and the country and the world the opportunity to be instructed on something that we never knew, and that is the history of Africans who were brought here in chains, bondage, and how they, with their families, helped build this community and build this country. Every night, before I go to sleep, in my evening prayers, I conclude with a prayer for Emanuel and I. Then I think of Senator Pigmy, his Jennifer, those 2 little girls, they're in my prayers and will be as long as I live. This community has accepted the responsibility that hopefully every community in the country will, that we must be more just and loving, and we must ever be on guard for signs of bigotry and hatred that can cause what happened at Mother Emanuel to happen, but weaken the goodness of this nation. You know, it's a relationship among peoples, that just like the relationship of spouses or family members, you never put it to bed, or we've got that relationship worked out. No, you're always improving it and showing sensitivity if there's been something developed that might have hurt a feeling or there's a misunderstanding. And that's how we must feel and be committed in this community and in our country about differences in religions and differences in colors and experiences. You know, we're all children of God, and so we have a duty and responsibility to keep building that relationship and strengthening our relationship. And I firmly believe that what we are doing and will do in this community, in little ways, in big ways, the forum and the museum, will help our country come to grips with this challenge, this never-ending challenge of America becoming a more just and loving country.
June 17th, 2015, a date that no Charlestonian will forget. They'll remember where they were that day. I think of John F. Kennedy's assassination, November 22nd, 1963. I was in the 3rd grade, but I remember exactly coming home from school and how I felt. Feel the same way about the terrible massacre at Mother Emanuel Church on June the 17th of 2015. We all couldn't believe it. We heard it on the news, and then we watched and couldn't believe what had happened. And then 2 days later, as a bond hearing was held and numerous family members came forward to express just unbelievably their forgiveness to this perpetrator, this demon. It was an amazing act of forgiveness and of God's grace. For me personally, it brought back other memories from my childhood. Although born in Charleston, my parents moved to Orangeburg in the mid-60s, and I was there a young man, only in the 8th grade in 1968, when the Orangeburg massacre occurred, and 3 African Americans were gunned down by police officers. Another night and period I'll never forget in my life. And to think that as a grown man in 2015, after having decided to run for the esteemed position of mayor of Charleston, almost 50 years later after the Orangeburg massacre, in essence, another massacre occurred here in Charleston by a young man wanting to start a race riot. Up until that time, that year, I'd been busy with the dream of serving this city, my campaign, my quest to become mayor. And 40 years of Mayor Riley's service here in Charleston, which had become historic in itself and legendary. Many folks in the community, many citizens, no matter who the victor, if you will, of that year's mayoral race was thinking through their minds, what happens after Joe Riley? I mean, our city had become so used to him being our leader, and a great one he was. But after June 17th, 2015, my whole mindset changed from that question in that campaign in my life and for our community. Not what happens after Joe Riley, but what happens after Mother Emanuel. And will we have the kind of commitment that we need going forward? In the light of the grace that was shown by Mother Emanuel, the congregation, the families, in light of that grace, will we move forward with the kinds of action, the kinds of progress, the kind of determination to heal racial wounds in our community and our country? That's the question, and still remains so today. It's so poignant to be here making this film for you today that a little over a week ago, that George Floyd was maliciously murdered in Minneapolis. And that same scab over the wound of racial division and injustice has been pulled off again. We find ourselves once again in this spot of evaluating where we are, where we've been, and where we're going in terms of racial reconciliation or conciliation. Because as has been pointed out, how can you bring back together what ain't never been together to start with? Elected later that year in 2015, we as a community have tried to keep in mind the grace and compassion of Mother Emanuel as a guiding light for our city, and to use the lens as we look at issues throughout our community of education to housing to economic empowerment, that we think about needed progress going forward. And it did lead our city to an apology for the cities of Charleston direct involvement in the administration of the institution of slavery in our city. Very poignant here in the city of Charleston, such a historic city, and this, our 350th birthday in 2020. But most of that 350 years has been comprised with slavery, racism, the end of Reconstruction, which was a glimmer of hope, Jim Crow, and it created a generational impact racism has in our city and our society. And that's why we have to look through that lens of checking for equity in all that we do. Are we perfect as we try to do those things? No, that's why we've all got to be together and work together to make progress going forward. But after that apology, we were committed to hiring a diversity officer in the city of Charleston. Our city council approved doing a racial bias audit of our police department. And guess what? Racial disparities were found in traffic stops and use of force. And again, very poignant with what's going on in the country right now in 2020. We're working on those things. We are making progress here in Charleston. We're trying to set an example. Can we do more? We all must. But let's work on that together. Housing. We're committed to providing affordable housing in our city and working on many projects. But we realize what's happened over the decades with gentrification and the lack of economic empowerment. That's the hardest thing that we all need to work on together. So here at 5 years after a terrible tragedy, once again we find ourselves with introspection, reviewing where we are, where we need to go, sense of prayer, a thankfulness to God and to His amazing grace. I was present at Reverend Pinckney's funeral in 2015 when President Obama came and surprised us all as he led us with his wonderful rendition of Amazing Grace. It was the most powerful group prayer remembrance that I can remember. And so the next year, I got to meet her. Joan Baez came to Charleston. It was 2 years later. And she had picked up a song, which now I play every now and again, commemorating that funeral and that feeling that we had when the president sang Amazing Grace, when my president sang Amazing Grace. It was moving. It was a tribute not only to those 9 who died, but to those 5 who survived, to the whole congregation of Mother Emanuel Church, to that sense of forgiveness, to that compassion that was shown, which I must tell you, in my estimation, it was the truest representation of God's love that we've ever witnessed. Please join me in a meditation and remembrance of the beautiful lives of the angels of the Emanuel 9. Cynthia Graham Hurd, Susie Jackson, Ethel Lance, Dr. DePayne Middleton, Reverend Clementa Pinckney, Tywanza Sanders, Reverend Daniel Lee Simmons Jr., Sharonda Coleman Singleton, and Myra Thompson. They are an inspiration to our city, that we might be a city on the hill, a lamp on the pedestal, to be a reflection of their love and service and God's love in this world.
As many of you know, I was born and raised in a parsonage. My father was a fundamentalist minister. And when my wife and I moved to Charleston, right out of South Carolina State, back in 1962, we affiliated and became members of Morris Brown AME Church. At that time, I developed relationships with a lot of people who were members of Emanuel AME Church, and of course, as a public school teacher at Old C. Brown High School, Emily, librarian over at Burke and Simonton Schools, Charleston and Charlestonians were home and family. And so you can imagine how it felt when I heard the news of that horrific event that took place in the basement of this, one of Charleston's most historic churches. I thought about many of those members that I knew, one of whom was Cynthia Graham Hurd, herself a librarian. I remember many times going to Old Dot Hall, and the fact that in later years, Mignon, our firstborn, talking about how much Cynthia meant to her. I thought about my relationships with Lance Simmons. In fact, the last time I spoke for a men's day at Emanuel Church, he was the pastor. And so my relationships with the church and the community were such that this was a real loss for me. Many of the other 7 families were, well, I wouldn't say close relationships, but we had relationships as well. And so I want to thank the church family there. I want to thank that community for showing this country the way to go. This event took place about 2 months after Walter Scott was shot in the back, running away from the police. In that instance, in Walter Scott's instance, the North Charleston community, led by its Republican mayor, came together and they protested. But they turned that protest into positive action. And the perpetrator of that crime was fired as a police officer, tried, convicted, is now serving time in jail. And here it comes 2 months later, this event. But once again, Charleston responded. This time, the city of Charleston itself, with a Democratic mayor, responded in such a way that it showed the country the way to go. This is not a partisan issue. This is an issue that's got to be dealt with by Democrats and Republicans. This young man, a self-professed white supremacist, told the world that he went there to ignite a race war. Instead, he lit a flame that is still burning. And that flame burns brighter today because of the reaction that this community of Charleston, North Charleston, and South Carolina Is it still burning? Yes. Clemson University has just renamed its honors college, taking John C. Calhoun's name off of the honors college. They have asked for legislative permission to rename Tillman Hall, Pitchfork Ben Tillman, taking his name off that building. But the question is, they want to take the building name back to where it was before it was renamed in the first place. Because of this church and this community, I think we can really show South Carolina the way to go. We need to stop honoring these people who were no friends to this country. They wanted to preserve the indignity of slavery. They wanted to hold on to white supremacy. So why are we celebrating them? Let's just say we had a bad dream for decades that we have now awakened from, and we are going to do better. Not just Clemson. We got to do some of that at Winthrop as well. In fact, this, if my memory serves, Pitchfork Ben Tillman's name is still on the building there. We have to do that in public places all over. As many of you know, I'm a history guy. I love history. I believe in history. History has its proper place, not in places of sovereignty and not necessarily in places of honor, but history can be relegated to places to study. As I saw a tweet a couple of days ago that says, those people who think they're removing monuments is destroying history, there are textbooks. If you're in love with history, read the books. We don't need to have statues honoring them. And so you, the members of Emanuel AME Church, the Charleston community, you ought to be proud. You ushered in a self-examination of this great country, and you demonstrated with your reactions how the state and nation can really overcome. Thank you, and Godspeed to each and every one of you.
To Reverend Manning and the entire Mother Emanuel community, I've been blessed and have had the honor to visit with your community so many times. You all give glory to the idea of what Jesus had for the church, the body of Christ, the knowledge that you're gathering your strength between you. Give evidence to the Bible verse, whenever 2 or 3 are gathered together in his name, he is in the midst. When evil showed itself in your community and took the life of those brave 9 souls, Reverend Clementa Pinckney, Reverend Sharonda Coleman Singleton, Cynthia Hurd, Susie Jackson, Ethel Lance, the Reverend DePayne Middleton Doctor, Tawanza Saunders, the Reverend Daniel Simmons Sr., and Myra Thompson. When evil took their lives, we know from our faith that they are in the loving arms of God. They are good and faithful servants. And now we, on this 5-year remembrance, it is up to us now to carry on ideals of faith, the deep conviction of our love of Christ. You all are light workers in that and are giving great master classes to the world. I am grateful for you. There's a Bible verse I spoke of on one of my visits. It's from the story of Joseph. When his brothers went to kill him and throw him into a well, they uttered the words, "Behold, here cometh the dreamer. Let us slay him and see what becomes of his dream." Indeed, that Bible verse is written at the Lorraine Motel where King was slain. What will become of his dream? We now have to answer that question every single day of our lives. And you all, to me, have turned your trial and tragedy into a powerful testimony of faith and love. You all, through your work, your continuance, your perseverance, you all, through your love, are indeed showing that the dream has not died and that we can make for a better day tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. Thank you, and God bless you.
5 years ago today, 9 good souls were ripped from this world. During evening Bible study at Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, they were killed by hate and white supremacy. Killed because of the color of their skin, for their faith, for their church's role in the community. We honor, my family, we all honor their memory. Their lives they would have lived, the good works they would have done. And we honor the unspeakable grace of their families in the Charleston community, who responded in a way that few of us could ever imagine having the moral courage to do. Justice sent their loved ones, killers, to prison. But in the ultimate act of charity, one by one, those grieving families, all of whom I've met, rose in court to forgive him. They looked hate in the eye after it had ripped the deepest hole in their lives and refused to let it rip into their hearts. Their grace set off a chain reaction of reflection and action that finally brought down the Confederate flag. That's how change happens. Hatred can be blinding, but grace can cast a new light. That's why my family and I stayed on at Emanuel AME for Sunday services after this god-awful event. There's a quote from Kierkegaard. It says, "Faith sees best in the dark." Today, our nation is still battling so many of these demons, the same demons, facing so much similar uncertainty and hate. Pittsburgh, Poway, Sutherland Springs, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. The injustices haven't stopped. You know, American history is not a fairy tale with a guaranteed happy ending. It's a constant battle for the soul of this nation that's been a constant tug of war. But history teaches us. The Emanuel 9 teaches. It's in our darkest moments of despair that we made some of our greatest progress. Today, there's a surge in energy and action across this nation. From the millions of peaceful protesters marching for justice to the frontline workers risking their lives to beat the coronavirus, we're now seeing the soul of the American people shine through. This is a time of unprecedented crisis, but the American people are channeling their anguish and anger into purpose. Today we honor the memory of the Emanuel 9 and the unspeakable grace of those who they left behind. Let their example guide us. With an open hand and a full heart, together we can restore the soul of this nation. God bless you all.
Hello, I am Samuel L. Green Sr., the presiding bishop of the 7th Episcopal District of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which represents the 6 annual conferences in the state of South Carolina. On June 17th, 2015, our lives were forever changed when white supremacist violence entered a Bible study in the basement of Mother Emanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church and took the lives of 9 precious souls. That night brought back memories of a legacy of violence imposed upon Black people in churches. From the bombing of the 16th Street Church in Birmingham to the wave of church bombings in the South in the 1990s, our most sacred sites, the places that were set aside for us to gather to worship a loving and liberating God, have been targets of violence. With all the progress that we as a people made, and we as a nation, to reconcile with our original sin of racism, June 17th, 2015, showed the nation, the United States, showed the world that our nation had not yet arrived to the promised land of freedom. Like many across this world, I wept. I remember when Jesus wept after feeling the pain and losing his friend Lazarus. Like many of us that night, Jesus felt weary and helpless, but he transformed his pain into purpose and spoke truth to power. Similarly, the strength of the Emanuel 9 families shocked the world as they transformed their pain into power and showed the world what radical love looked like in public. I walked with the family a couple of days during the trial, and as I sat there in that courtroom and saw the resilience and saw the faith of the family members of those who were slain by the supremacists who sat at the defendant table. As I watched him sit there as if nothing mattered, I wanted to cry out as my soul was crying out. That grandmother mattered. That mother mattered. That husband mattered. That wife mattered. That son, that daughter, that loved one, that soul, that human being, that person mattered. And they still matter. Now, we're 5 years later. As the nation continues to grapple with its sin of racism, we must look inward and turn our pain into purpose. We must turn tragedy into triumph. We must turn despair into determination and choose radical love. Radical love is resistance. Love is a force that resists evil in every form. We counter hate with love. Love is grounded in the ultimate concern of Jesus Christ. Love transforms dark days into bright tomorrows. Radical love reimagines what's possible. Through radical love, we can create the world that shall be where every life matters, where every person is valued, and where everyone has the opportunity to succeed. We need a new moral vision for society grounded in radical love in order to imagine the way forward. Finally, we need radical love to rejoice in the midst of suffering. Radical love gives us hope to know that the moral arc of this universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Radical love helps us to rejoice in knowing that truth forever on the scaffold, Rome forever on the throne. Yet that scaffold sways the future, and behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own. We rejoice today because we know that the 9 souls on June 17th, 2015, lives matter and mattered.